My father mocked. You'll never be as good as your brother. I stood up. Then tell him to pay the bills. I'm not sending money anymore. My father scoffed. What money? We never received a single dollar from you. I said nothing. Then I brought the receipts. He turned pale on page 1. Dad. What happened? This can't be. Please. I know I was wrong. Don't do this. Before I tell you about the absolute ruins my family's empire was reduced to, and the look on their faces when the truth finally came out, let me know where you are watching from in the comments section. Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. The air inside the Savannah Yacht Club tasted like expensive champagne and old money. I was 29 years old, standing in a rented tuxedo that pinched my shoulders, surrounded by people who had spent their entire lives applauding my younger brother, Julian. My father, Richard Whitmore, stood at the head of the banquet table. He clinked his silver spoon against his crystal glass, demanding the room's attention. He loved this part. He loved the spotlight. He was celebrating 30 years of Whitmore Marine Supply, the family business he ran, or at least, the business he pretended to run successfully. Julian stood right next to him, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car, flashing that perfect, television-ready smile. My father raised his glass. He thanked the suppliers, the local politicians, and the investors. Then his eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. I was standing near the back, my feet aching from a 14-hour shift managing freight audits at the port. He pointed his glass directly at me. A smirk played on his lips. And then there is my oldest son, Matthew, my father said, his voice amplified by the microphone. Hard worker, very practical. But let's be honest, Matt, you'll never be as good as your brother. You just don't have the Whitmore charm. The room erupted into laughter, a chorus of wealthy, polished strangers chuckling at my expense. It was a familiar sound. I had been the punchline of my father's jokes for as long as I could remember. My mother, Elaine, sat at the table, dabbing her lips with a napkin, not meeting my eyes. Julian just chuckled, adjusting his cuffs, soaking in the praise. Normally, I would swallow the insult. I would look at the floor, force a tight smile, and let it pass to protect the family peace. But tonight, the exhaustion in my bones was heavier than usual. Tonight, I felt something snap inside my chest. A cold, clear focus washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. I set my untouched drink down on a passing waiter's tray. The clink of the glass was soft, but in my mind, it sounded like a gavel dropping. I stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly. If Julian is so good, I said, my voice cutting through the dying laughter. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Then tell him to pay the bills. I'm not sending money anymore. A heavy silence crashed down on the ballroom. The musicians in the corner stopped playing. My father's smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, angry flush creeping up his neck. He scoffed, looking around to make sure his wealthy friends were still watching. What money? My father demanded, his voice echoing loudly. Are you drunk, Matthew? We never received a single dollar from you. This family built its own wealth. He thought I would back down. He thought the public humiliation would make me retreat into the shadows like the obedient workhorse I had always been. He wanted me to argue so he could call me crazy. I didn't argue. I didn't say another word. I just looked at him, then at Julian, and then at the door. I turned my back on the entire room and walked out into the heavy, humid Savannah night. The damp air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, my hands weren't shaking from anxiety. They were perfectly steady. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I had the receipts, every single one of them, and by the time I brought them back to him, he would be begging me to stop. But to understand how a few pieces of paper could destroy a man's entire reality, you have to understand how the bleeding started. Growing up in Savannah, there are two distinct worlds. There is the historic district, with its sprawling oak trees, Spanish moss, and manicured mansions. That was where my parents lived. That was where the Whitmore name meant something. Then there is the industrial port. The gritty, loud, grease-stained world of massive cargo ships, steel containers, and sweat. That was my world. From the day I was born, I was the dependable one. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to Julian. Julian was 3 years younger, and he was my mother's masterpiece. He was charismatic, athletic, and possessed a natural ability to make people hand him whatever he wanted. By the time he was 22, he was already working in local media, a bright young face doing puff pieces for local news stations. He went to private schools, wore designer clothes, and never worked a day in the dirt. I, on the other hand, was the heavy lifter. When I was 18, my father sat me down in his dark oak office. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and told me that times were tough. He told me that the college fund they had supposedly set up for me had to be absorbed into the business to keep things afloat. "You're a practical man, Matthew," he had said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You don't need a fancy degree. You need real-world experience." So I went to work at the port. I started on the loading docks, checking manifests in the blistering Georgia heat. I worked my way up to freight audit and logistics. I learned to read complex ledgers, catch billing errors, and track massive amounts of capital moving across the ocean. I built a solid career, earning a respectable salary. I bought a modest apartment near the river. I thought I had escaped the shadow of the Whitmore legacy. But my family had a way of reaching into my life and pulling me back into the dark. My father loved to boast at the country club about his self-made success. He ran Whitmore Marine Supply, selling high-end parts and equipment to yacht owners and commercial boat captains. From the outside, the business looked like a pillar of the local economy. From the inside, it was a rotting ship taking on water faster than anyone could bail it out. My father was a proud man, but he was a terrible businessman. He cared more about the appearance of wealth than actual profit margins. He would overspend on inventory just to impress a new vendor. He would host lavish donor lunches that my mother curated, spending thousands of dollars on floral arrangements while the warehouse lease went unpaid. And Julian was oblivious to all of it. Julian floated through life, attending charity boards and sponsored events, representing the future of the Whitmore family. He brought home Isabella, a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine and had expensive tastes to match. My parents adored her. They loved the image of the perfect, wealthy family. I saw the cracks early on. I saw the late notices piling up on my father's desk when I visited for Sunday dinners. I saw my mother nervously avoiding calls from the country club about their overdue membership fees. But I stayed quiet. It wasn't my business. I had my own life, my own job, my own rent to pay. Until the phone rang one night 3 years ago. The night the invisible chains were wrapped around my neck, disguised as family loyalty. I still remember the exact sound of the rain lashing against my bedroom window when I answered that call. It was the moment I stopped being a son and started being an ATM. It was a Tuesday night in November, just past midnight. The caller ID flashed my father's name. Richard Whitmore never called me past 9 o'clock unless someone was dead or he needed something he couldn't get from his wealthy friends. I picked up the phone. The line was quiet for a moment, except for the sound of my father taking a sharp, shaky breath. "Matthew," he said. His voice lacked its usual booming authority. Sounded thin, desperate. "Dad? What's wrong?" "I have a slight liquidity issue, son. A temporary cash flow problem. The payroll draft for the warehouse hits at 3 a.m., and a major client's invoice hasn't cleared yet. If payroll bounces, the union guys will walk out tomorrow." I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. "How short are you?" He hesitated. 14,000. I let out a slow breath. $14,000. It was a massive chunk of my savings. It was the money I had been putting away for a down payment on a house of my own. "Dad, I don't know. It's just a bridge loan, Matt," he said quickly, his tone shifting into salesman mode. "I'll have it back to you by Friday. Monday at the latest. You know how these corporate accounts are. They drag their feet. But you're my rock, son. You understand the numbers. Julian wouldn't know how to handle this. He played the exact chord he knew would work. He acknowledged my competence. He made me feel essential. He pitted me against the golden child, giving me a rare crumb of superiority. Against my better judgment, I opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my dark bedroom. I logged into my bank account, navigated to the wire transfer page, and typed in the routing number for Whitmore Marine Supply. I hit confirm. $14,000 vanished from my account. It's done, I told him. You're a good man, Matthew. A real lifesaver, he said. The relief in his voice was palpable. He hung up quickly. Friday came and went. No money appeared in my account. Monday passed. Nothing. When I finally called him on Wednesday, he acted like I was harassing him. He told me the client was still delaying and that I needed to be a team player. The following month, my phone rang again. This time it was my Aunt Martha, my mother's sister. She had this sickly sweet southern drawl that always made the hairs on my arms stand up. Matthew, honey, she cooed through the receiver. Your mother is just beside herself. The property tax installment on the family home is due, and with the business expanding, things are a little tight. She's worried sick they might put a lien on the house. Where is Dad? I asked, my jaw tightening. Oh, he's out of town meeting a big supplier. You know he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. You're the eldest, Matthew. It's your duty to step up. Keep this between us. Protect your mother's peace. Duty. Protect. Words used to trap me. I wired the money directly to the county tax assessor. $12,200. That was how it started. It wasn't one massive theft. It was a slow, steady hemorrhage. The first time sounded temporary. Then came tax season. Then the lease on the storage yard. Then the quarterly marine insurance premium that my father swore he forgot to pay. Every time I hesitated, the family machinery kicked into gear. My father would praise my practical nature. My mother would cry softly about losing the legacy of the house. Aunt Martha would remind me of my duty. And Julian never saw any of it. He was busy posting photos from ski resorts and complaining about the service at five-star restaurants. I was working overtime, managing complex logistics during the day, and acting as the secret CFO of a failing family business at night. I was bleeding myself dry to keep their polished facade from cracking, and the exhaustion was beginning to destroy my own life. The lack of sleep became a physical weight pulling me toward the concrete floor of the port. Savannah in July is a brutal place to work. The heat rises off the asphalt in shimmering waves, and the smell of diesel fuel and salt water clings to your skin. I was vying for a major promotion at the logistics firm. The position was Senior Director of Freight Operations. It came with a substantial salary bump, better hours, and a corner office with air conditioning that actually worked. I had put in 5 years of flawless work to earn it. My only real competition was a guy named Carter. Carter was slick. He wore tailored khakis on the loading dock, spent his lunch hours playing golf with the regional managers, and took credit for other people's efficiency. He was exactly the kind of guy my father would have loved. The week the final decision was being made, my father dropped a massive crisis in my lap. A major shipment of marine electronics had been held up in customs due to an unpaid tariff penalty. If those parts didn't reach his biggest client by Friday, the contract was dead. My father called me in a panic, begging me to navigate the customs paperwork and front the $22,000 penalty. I spent 3 nights awake, sitting at my kitchen table with endless cups of black coffee, untangling the mess my father's incompetent accountant had made. I filed the appeals, wired the penalty money from my emergency fund, and got the cargo released. But I paid the price. On Thursday morning, I had to present a quarterly audit report to the regional board. This was my final test for the promotion. I stood at the front of the conference room, the projector glaring in my eyes. My vision blurred. My hands shook from caffeine and exhaustion. When the board asked a critical question about overseas fuel surcharges, my mind went blank. The numbers scrambled in my head. I stammered. I looked at my notes, but the rows of data looked like a foreign language. Carter sat across the table, leaning back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. He smiled, a shark smelling blood in the water. Carter smoothly stepped in, answering the question perfectly, citing the exact figures I had compiled but was too exhausted to remember. He stole the presentation right out from under me. The next day, the regional manager called me into his office. He looked at me with genuine pity. "Matthew, your work ethic is incredible," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "But we need someone in the director role who can handle pressure without cracking. You looked completely burnt out in there yesterday. We're giving the position to Carter." I walked out of that office feeling hollow. I went to the break room, poured a cup of stale coffee, and stared out the window at the massive container ships moving slowly down the river. I had lost the promotion. I had lost the salary increase that could have helped me rebuild the savings my father had drained. I was sacrificing my own future to subsidize a family that didn't even respect me. Later that evening, my father texted me. "Customs cleared. Cargo delivered. Good job." "No, thank you. No, I owe you." Just a confirmation that the tool he used had worked correctly. I crushed the empty paper coffee cup in my fist until my knuckles popped. I was so tired. But I was about to find out that the exhaustion was nothing compared to the absolute betrayal waiting for me in an email inbox. The breaking point didn't happen during a screaming match. It happened quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, staring at a PDF document. Whitmore Marine Supply had recently hired a new junior accountant named Sarah. She was young, fresh out of college, and terrified of making a mistake. My father intimidated her, so whenever she found a discrepancy in the books, she would quietly email me to help her fix it before my father found out. She knew I handled the emergency funds. Around 3 p.m., an email popped up on my phone from Sarah. Subject: confusion regarding recent wire transfer. I opened it. She had attached a bank reconciliation statement. "Hi Matthew, I'm trying to balance the books for the month. I see your wire transfer for $15,000 came in on the 12th. You noted it was for the warehouse liability insurance renewal. But the insurance company sent a cancellation warning yesterday. When I traced the funds, it looks like the $15,000 was moved out of the operating account the same day it arrived, rerouted to a personal expense account." My blood ran cold. I locked the door to my small port office. I pulled up the attachment on my desktop monitor, zooming in on the routing numbers. Sarah was right. My $15,000, money I had scraped together by selling off a portion of my meager stock portfolio, hit the business account at 9 a.m. At 11:30 a.m., my father had authorized a transfer of that exact amount out of the business and into an account labeled Owner's Draw J. Whitmore. Julian. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I had back-end access to some of the family accounts from when I had set up their online banking years ago. I dug into Julian's transaction history. There it was, a cashier's check issued to a luxury auto dealership in Atlanta. I leaned back in my cheap office chair, staring at the screen. The air in the room felt too thin to breathe. My father hadn't used my money to save the warehouse. He had used my money to fund the down payment on a brand new, slate gray Porsche 911 for my brother. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice water in my veins. I opened Instagram. Julian's profile was public. I didn't have to scroll far. There was a photo of Julian, wearing designer sunglasses, leaning against the hood of the gleaming Porsche. Isabella was standing next to him, holding a massive bouquet of roses. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Celebrating the new ride with my beautiful girl. Hashtag self-made, hashtag Whitmore legacy." Hard work. Self-made. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I thought about the promotion I lost because I was too exhausted from doing their paperwork. I thought about my empty savings account. I thought about the lie my father told me on the phone, the panic in his voice that was nothing but a calculated performance. They weren't struggling. They were using me as a human shield against the consequences of their own vanity. My father was robbing Peter to pay Paul, except I was Peter, and Paul was an arrogant 26-year-old who thought he was a king. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone against the wall. A terrifying, absolute calm settled over me. The kind of calm a demolition expert feels right before they push the detonator. I picked up my phone and dialed David. David was a former colleague of mine, a forensic auditor who had left the port to start his own consulting firm. He was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way a detective looks at a crime scene. He was brilliant, ruthless with numbers, and the most loyal friend I had. He answered on the second ring. "Matt, you're working late." "Dave," I said, my voice eerily steady. "I need your help. I need to build a timeline. A financial autopsy." "Autopsy? Who died?" David asked, his tone shifting to professional curiosity. "Nobody yet," I replied, staring at the photo of Julian's Porsche. "But my family's business is about to." "Bring me the files," Dave said. "I'll put the coffee on." I hung up. I spent the next 3 hours printing every bank confirmation, every email from my father pleading for cash, every manipulated ledger entry. I packed them into a heavy leather briefcase. I was done being the dependable son. I was going to become their reckoning. David's apartment smelled like dark roast coffee and old paper. His dining table was a massive slab of reclaimed wood, completely covered in my bank statements, printed emails, and tax documents. It was 2 a.m. We had been working for 6 hours straight. David sat at the head of the table, his glasses pushed up into his dark hair, a yellow highlighter spinning rapidly between his fingers. He didn't speak much. He just read, cross-referenced, and calculated. Every now and then, he would let out a low, sharp whistle. I sat across from him, staring at a folder on my laptop. I had created it months ago, naming it Harbor, a bland, boring name meant to hide the explosive truth inside. Within that folder were subfolders: payroll rescue, tax advance, insurance gap, Julian legal, emergency wire. "This is," David started, dropping his highlighter onto the table. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Matt, this is systemic financial abuse. This isn't just a dad asking his kid for a loan. This is money laundering disguised as family loyalty." "Give me the final number," I said quietly. David tapped his laptop screen. He turned it around so I could see the spreadsheet he had built. The number at the bottom of the column was highlighted in bright red. $184,612. $184,612. Over 3 years. I stared at the number. It sat there on the screen like a verdict. That was a house. That was a retirement fund. That was my life, bled out drop by drop, wire by wire, late-night panic attack by late-night panic attack. "He's been classifying your incoming wires as owner's capital injection," David explained, his voice hard. "He's hiding your money from the official CPA to make the business look solvent. Then, he draws it out through secondary channels to fund Julian's lifestyle and your mother's charity events. Technically, he's defrauding his own suppliers by misrepresenting his liquidity. He bought Julian a Porsche with the warehouse insurance money," I stated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I saw that," David said, pointing to a stack of papers. "And last year, that $6,000 you sent for the emergency inventory delay? He used it to pay the retainer for a lawyer when Julian got sued for breach of contract by a media agency. You paid for the Golden Boy's legal defense." I closed my eyes. The sheer scale of the deception was suffocating. They hadn't just used me. They had mocked me while standing on a foundation built entirely out of my sweat. "What do you want to do?" David asked, leaning forward. "Because if you take this to a lawyer, you can sue him for fraud. You have the paper trail. A lawsuit takes years. It gets tied up in court. He'll spin it to the family, make me look like a greedy, unstable son trying to steal from his poor, hard-working father," I said, opening my eyes. The cold clarity from earlier had crystallized into a solid strategy. "I don't want to sue him right now. I want to expose him. I want to remove the net." David smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. "Print everything," he said. "Organize it by category. Date, amount, destination, and the lie he told to get it. We build a binder. A black box of his entire fake empire." "And then?" I asked. "And then," David said, reaching for his coffee mug, "you stop everything tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. If you wait until the sun comes up, your mother will call. She'll cry. She'll talk about family. And you'll lose your nerve. You cut the cord in the dark." He was right. Rage is a powerful fuel, but it burns out quickly. A clean ledger with signatures, dates, and transfer IDs is a blade. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't feel guilty. We started sorting. Section 1, personal transfers. Section 2, payroll and tax gaps. Section 3, Julian's expenses disguised as business costs. Section 4, public statements my father made boasting about his wealth, directly contradicting the dates he was begging me for money. By 4 a.m., the printer finally stopped humming. The binder was thick, black, and heavy. It was a weapon of mass destruction, loaded with ink and math. I placed my hand flat on the cover. It was time to pull the plug. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen cut through the dimly lit room. David stood behind me, his arms crossed over his chest, watching in silence as a witness to the execution. I logged into the corporate banking bridge. Because I was the one constantly rescuing them, my father had foolishly given me administrative access to the primary payroll system, linking my personal checking account as the ultimate overdraft protection. It was a digital safety net I had built to ensure the warehouse workers didn't suffer for my father's incompetence. I clicked on the Linked Accounts tab. My name sat there, a silent guarantor of their lavish lives. My finger hovered over the trackpad. A ghost of guilt whispered in my ear, "They're your family. The business will fold. Mom will be humiliated." Then I pictured Julian leaning against that Porsche. I heard my father's voice echoing in the ballroom, calling me practical but charmless. I remembered Carter taking my promotion while I was drowning in my father's customs paperwork. The guilt evaporated. I clicked Remove Authorization. A warning box popped up on the screen. "Are you sure you want to remove this backup funding source? Scheduled payroll drafts may fail." I hit Confirm. Next, I navigated to the county tax portal. I found the automatic recurring payment I had set up for my mother's historic house. I canceled it. Then the marine insurance portal. Canceled. The business vendor emergency line. Canceled. I systematically went through every single digital thread connecting my hard-earned money to the Whitmore family, and I severed it with a click. I didn't steal a single cent. I didn't hack anything maliciously. I simply took back what was mine. I stopped carrying the weight they refused to lift. "It's done," I whispered. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't heavy anymore. Felt empty, but in a good way. Like a room that had finally been cleared of suffocating smoke. David patted my shoulder. "Go home, Matt. Get some sleep. The blast wave won't hit until Monday morning when the banks open." I drove back to my apartment. The streets of Savannah were deserted, the street lamps casting long, quiet shadows across the cobblestones. I felt a strange sense of euphoria mixed with dread. I had just initiated the collapse of my own family. I walked into my apartment, threw my keys on the counter, and fell onto the couch without even taking off my shoes. I expected to lay awake, my mind racing with anxiety. But the truth is, I slept harder that night than I had in 3 years. I woke up late on Saturday morning. I made coffee. I didn't check the business accounts. I didn't look at the inventory manifests. I watched a baseball game on TV. It was mundane, normal, and glorious. But the peace was temporary. The enemy was already maneuvering. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It wasn't my father. It wasn't Julian. It was a text from Luke. Luke was my cousin, Aunt Martha's son. He was a few years older than me, a real estate agent who always played the role of the neutral peacekeeper in the family. We used to grab beers sometimes, and I considered him a decent guy, someone who understood how crazy my parents could be. Hey man, the text read. Heard things got pretty tense at the gala. You doing okay? Let's grab a drink later, just you and me. Vent a little. I stared at the screen. A warning bell rang in the back of my head. The timing was too perfect. I didn't answer Luke's text immediately. I let it sit there. Instead, I called him. Hey, Matt, Luke answered, his voice dripping with casual concern. Glad you called back, man. Sounded like Uncle Richard really laid into you the other night. It was what it was, Luke, I said, keeping my tone carefully neutral. I'm fine. Just tired. Look, I know he can be a hard ass, Luke continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. But you know how much pressure he's under. The business is tricky right now. Julian told me you threatened to cut off some funds? Man, you don't want to do that. You know it'll kill your mom. Just talk to him. What exactly did you mean by receipts? There it was. The fishing expedition. Luke wasn't calling because he cared about my mental health. He was calling because my father was too proud to ask me himself, so he sent his sister's son to do reconnaissance. They were terrified of the word receipts I had dropped at the gala. They needed to know exactly what kind of ammunition I had. A cold wave of disgust washed over me. Even Luke, the guy I thought was an ally, was just another pawn in their game of appearances. I don't know what you're talking about, Luke, I lied smoothly. I was just angry. I don't have any receipts. I just need a break from paying for Julian's bar tabs. I heard a small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief from Luke. Right? Yeah, of course. Just blowing off steam. I'll keep that in mind. Get some rest, Matt. He hung up. He had the intel he wanted. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I was just throwing a tantrum. Less than an hour later, the trap was sprung. My phone lit up again. This time, it was a text from my mother, Elaine. Matthew, darling. We need to clear the air. Please come to the house for Sunday dinner tomorrow night. Julian will be there. We are a family. We will discuss this reasonably. Please don't break your mother's heart. Be reasonable. That was their favorite phrase. It meant, lower your voice, open your wallet, and let us walk all over you without making a scene. I forwarded the text to David. His reply came a minute later. They think you're bluffing. They're setting up an ambush to bully you back into submission before the banks open on Monday. Are you going? I typed back, yes, but I'm bringing a prop. I spent Sunday morning organizing my thoughts. I didn't bring the massive black binder David and I had created. That was the nuclear option, reserved for a public execution. For a private family dinner, I only needed a scalpel. I printed a single piece of paper. It was a summary sheet. One column for the date, one for the amount, and one for the exact lie my father had told me to get the money, cross-referenced with where the money actually went. The Porsche, Isabella's jewelry, the yacht club fees. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. When I drove up to my parents' historic house on Sunday evening, the driveway was full. My father's Mercedes was parked next to Julian's gleaming new Porsche. The sheer audacity of parking that car right where I could see it made my jaw clench. I walked up the brick steps and pushed open the heavy oak door. The smell of roasted beef and expensive red wine filled the hallway. It smelled like a trap. I patted my jacket pocket, feeling the crisp edge of the paper. It was time to show them that the workhorse had teeth. The dining room looked exactly like it always did. The silver was polished until it gleamed. Tall white candles flickered in the center of the table, and my mother's best china caught the warm light. It was a perfectly staged set for a perfectly fake family. My mother, Elaine, sat near the kitchen door, wearing a cashmere sweater, her hands nervously fluttering over the silverware. Julian sat across from me, wearing a smirk and a designer polo shirt, playing with his phone. My father sat at the head of the table. His posture was rigid, his face carved into an expression of disappointed authority. He was wearing a dark blazer, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch forced to discipline an unruly child. No one said a word as I sat down. The tension was thick enough to choke on. My father waited until the housekeeper poured the water and retreated to the kitchen. He didn't bother with small talk. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy mahogany table. "You created a disgraceful scene at a public event, Matthew," my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "You embarrassed this family in front of my most important vendors. You owe me an apology. And you owe your brother an apology for your baseless accusations." Julian snorted softly, not looking up from his phone. "Yeah, man, that was totally unhinged." Isabella was mortified. My mother reached out, her voice trembling. "Matthew, please, we just want peace. If you felt neglected, you should have talked to us privately. You don't scream about money in public. It's common." I looked at the three of them. They were a united front of denial. They had convinced themselves that I was the villain, the unstable element disrupting their perfect lives. Luke had done his job well. He had convinced them I was empty-handed. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip and set it down. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth," I said evenly. My father's jaw tightened. He slapped his hand flat against the table. The silverware rattled. "What truth?" he barked, his voice rising. "That you've built some psychotic fantasy where you're supporting everyone? You are a freight auditor, Matthew. You check boxes on shipping crates. You do not finance Whitmore Marine Supply. I built this company with my bare hands." "A fantasy," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes," my father shouted, emboldened by my calm demeanor. "You're delusional. You've lost your mind. I have never needed your help, and I have certainly never begged you for a single dime." He had said it again. He had backed himself right into the corner I had prepared for him. I reached inside my jacket pocket. I pulled out the single folded piece of paper. I didn't rush. I smoothed it out carefully on the table. Then, using 2 fingers, I slid it across the polished mahogany until it stopped directly in front of his plate. "Read it," I said. My father looked at the paper with bored contempt, as if it were a child's drawing. He sighed heavily, picked it up, and adjusted his reading glasses. He read the first line. March 12th, $15,000. Stated purpose, warehouse insurance. Actual destination, down payment, Porsche 911, Julian Whitmore. His face froze. The angry red flush drained from his cheeks instantly, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. He read the second line. October 4th, $6,000. Stated purpose, emergency inventory. Actual destination, legal retainer, breach of contract defense, Julian Whitmore. What? My father stammered. His voice cracked. The booming patriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified old man holding a piece of paper that proved he was a fraud. "Where did you get this?" "I'm the one who executes the transfers, Dad," I said softly, leaning forward. "Did you really think I wouldn't keep the receipts? Did you think I was that stupid?" My mother leaned over, trying to read the paper. "Richard? What is it? What does it say?" Julian finally put his phone down, frowning. "Dad? What's going on?" My father ignored them. He stared at me, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Matthew, these are manipulated. You're trying to frame me." "Bank and firm transfer IDs are right next to the amounts," I replied, standing up. I dropped my napkin on my empty plate. "You can call the bank on Monday to verify them, but you'll be pretty busy on Monday." I turned toward the door. "Matthew, wait!" my father yelled, the authority completely stripped from his voice. It was a plea. I stopped in the doorway and looked back at Julian. The golden boy looked confused, totally unaware that his luxury life was currently crashing down around him. "The next payroll issue is yours, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "The house taxes are yours. Enjoy the Porsche." I walked out of the house. I didn't look back. The blast wave hit exactly when David said it would. Monday morning, 9:07 a.m. I was standing on the loading deck at the port, wearing a high-vis vest, holding a clipboard, watching a massive crane lift a shipping container into the sky. The smell of the ocean was strong. The noise of the port was deafening, but I could feel my phone buzzing furiously in my pocket. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. My mother. Let it go. At 9:30 a.m., my father called a third time. I stepped away from the noise of the machinery and answered. I didn't say hello. Matthew! My father screamed into the phone. There was no pretense of authority left. It was pure, unadulterated panic. The payroll bridge bounced. The bank rejected the draft. What did you do? I did exactly what I said I would do, I answered, my voice steady, watching the container lock into place. I stopped sending money. You vindictive little bastard, he roared. You disabled the emergency authorization. The union reps are in my office right now. They're threatening to walk out. You have to turn it back on. Now. Hire a controller. Richard, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. Or better yet, ask Julian to sell the car. That should cover payroll for a month. You are destroying this family, he yelled, his voice breaking. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I corrected him coldly. I'm done being your human shield. Figure it out. I hung up. I blocked his number for the rest of the day. An hour later, Julian texted me. The golden boy was finally starting to feel the heat. Matt, what the hell is going on? Dad is having a meltdown in the office. He's talking about freezing my corporate card. Isabella is freaking out. Can we please not do this right now? I have a major charity photo shoot tomorrow. I can't be stressed out. I read the text twice. I actually laughed out loud on the dock. It was a harsh, bitter sound. The business was literally hours away from a union strike, and my brother was worried about looking stressed in a photo shoot. I replied, timing mattered when Dad stole my savings to buy your car. Not now. Grow up, Julian. I blocked his number, too. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. For years, they had controlled my emotions, my finances, my future. In less than 24 hours, by simply doing nothing, by simply removing my hidden support, I had brought them to their knees. But I knew my father. He was a survivor. A rat trapped in a corner will chew off its own leg to escape. He wouldn't just accept defeat. He would lie, cheat, and scramble to find a new source of money to cover his tracks before the suppliers realized the business was insolvent. And I knew exactly where he was going to look for that money. That afternoon, I met David for coffee near the port. The heat was sweltering. David looked at my phone, which was lighting up with voicemails from my mother. He's panicking, I told David. Payroll bounced. Good, David said, taking a sip of his iced coffee. But he's not dead in the water yet. Have you checked the mail today? No, why? David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope with a wax seal. He slid it across the table. This got delivered to my office, David said. Since I'm a vendor on their old list, you probably have one waiting at your apartment. I opened the envelope. It was an invitation to the Whitmore Foundation Commodore Dinner at the Savannah Yacht Club. This coming Thursday. The Commodore Dinner, I muttered. It's his biggest networking event of the year. Exactly, David said, leaning in. And rumor has it, he's invited Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling. The name hung in the humid air between David and me like a thundercloud. Sterling was a venture capitalist, an old-school maritime investor who owned half the commercial docks on the eastern seaboard. He was famously ruthless, incredibly wealthy, and obsessed with clean books and strong family leadership. My father had been trying to court Sterling for years, begging for a massive capital injection to expand the business. If Richard secures Sterling's investment, David said, tapping the invitation, he can cover the massive holes in the ledger. He pays off the vendors, stabilizes payroll, and buries the evidence of his fraud. He survives. And he'll spin the story to make you look like a disgruntled employee who got fired. I stared at the gold-embossed lettering on the invitation. My father was going to use this dinner to put on his greatest performance yet. He was going to stand in front of Savannah's elite, including Sterling, and play the role of the successful, self-made patriarch. He was going to use the business's fake stability I had paid for with my blood and sweat, to con a billionaire. "We can't let him get that money," I said, my jaw clenching. "If Sterling audits the books later and finds out my father cooked them using my cash transfers, I could be implicated. I could lose my license." "That," David said, his eyes gleaming with professional intensity, "is why we are going to the Commodore dinner. You need to establish, publicly and on the record, that you have severed all financial ties, and that the liquidity he claims to have is a phantom." The plan formed instantly. The private warning at the Sunday dinner had failed. My father was still trying to outrun the truth. It was time for the nuclear option. "The binder," I said. 3 copies, David confirmed. High-quality print. Tabbed, indexed, and undeniable. Wednesday night, I drove to a 24-hour litigation support center across town. I didn't use my home printer. It would have melted trying to print the sheer volume of evidence. I stood at the counter, watching the massive commercial laser printers spit out page after page of my family's sins. Bank records, forged ledger entries, the timeline of Julian's Porsche purchase, the desperate emails. The clerk, a young guy with tattoos on his arms, bound the pages into thick, black leather binders. He handed them to me across the counter. They were heavy. "Looks like a nasty divorce," the clerk noted casually. "Worse," I said, taking the binders. "It's an inheritance." I drove home and laid the 3 black binders on my kitchen counter. They looked like tombstones. I opened the first one. Section 1, the drain. Every dollar I had sent, meticulously tracked. Section 2, the fraud. The internal accounting showing my money being classified as revenue to trick suppliers. Section 3, the beneficiary. Julian's luxury purchases, funded by the company account the day after my transfers cleared. I traced my finger over the numbers. I thought about the 14-hour shifts. I thought about the promotion Carter stole. I thought about the look on my father's face when he mocked me at the gala, telling the world I would never be as good as the brother who was literally driving a car I paid for. My phone vibrated. A text from my mother. "Matthew, Dad is under so much pressure. Mr. Sterling is coming tomorrow. Please just be a good son. Don't ruin this for us. We need this." I didn't block her. I wanted her to be able to reach me when the dust settled. I just closed the phone, placed my hand on the cold leather of the binder, and looked out the window toward the yacht club. Tomorrow night, the Whitmore legacy was going to burn to the ground, and I was bringing the gasoline. Thursday evening arrived with a thick, suffocating heat that only Savannah can produce. The air felt heavy, pressing down on the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oak trees outside my apartment. But inside, my blood was running ice cold. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a crisp, dark navy suit. I didn't rent a tuxedo this time. I bought this suit with my own salary, a symbol of the man I was without them. David stood in my living room, leaning against the kitchen counter, wearing a sharp charcoal blazer. He had one of the heavy black binders tucked under his arm. "You ready for this?" David asked. His voice was calm, the voice of a man walking into a boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. "I've been ready for 3 years," I replied. We drove to the Savannah Yacht Club in silence. I wanted to arrive exactly 10 minutes late. I wanted the room to settle. I wanted my father to feel safe, to let his guard down, to believe that his massive lie was perfectly secure. We handed the valet the keys and walked up the grand sweeping staircase. The heavy mahogany doors of the Commodore banquet hall were closed, but I could hear the muffled sound of polite applause and the clinking of fine crystal. I pushed the doors open. The room was a sea of wealth. Brass railings gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Old men in tailored tuxedos laughed too loudly at bad jokes, and women dripping in diamonds spoke in hushed, practiced tones. It was an ecosystem built entirely on appearances. My mother, Elaine, saw me first. She was sitting near the front, wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my first car. When her eyes met mine, all the color instantly drained from her face. Her hand shot up to cover her mouth. My father didn't notice. He was already at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight. He gripped the edges of the wooden stand, projecting his booming, authoritative voice across the room. Sitting at the table directly in front of him was Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a silver-haired shark of a man, watching my father with sharp, calculating eyes. Whitmore Marine Supply was built on traditional values. My father declared into the microphone, flashing his signature confident smile. Hard work, sacrifice, and above all, integrity. We don't take shortcuts. We don't rely on outside bailouts. We stand on our own 2 feet. And that independence is exactly what makes us the most reliable partner on the eastern seaboard. He paused, waiting for the applause. A few people clapped politely. I didn't stop walking. I moved down the center aisle, my footsteps silent on the thick, patterned carpet. David walked right behind me, a shadow holding a bomb. Julian, sitting at the head table next to Isabella, finally noticed me. He frowned, leaning over to whisper something to his fiancée. He looked annoyed, as if a servant had wandered into the wrong room. I reached the front of the room just as my father took a breath to continue his speech. I didn't wait for him to speak. I stepped right up to the front table, directly in the line of sight between my father and Mr. Sterling. Integrity is a fascinating word, Richard, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't need a microphone. In a room full of people trained to politely ignore conflict, a steady, calm voice cuts through the air like a razor blade. Every single head in the banquet hall turned. The silence was immediate and absolute. My father froze at the podium. His knuckles turned white where he gripped the wood. A bead of sweat instantly broke out on his forehead, catching the glare of the spotlight. Matthew, my father hissed through clenched teeth, his voice barely carrying past the first row. What are you doing? Sit down. We are not doing this here. Oh, I think we are, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. You liked doing this at the gala last week, remember? You stood in front of half these people and mocked me. You said I had no charm. You said you never received a single dollar from me. I thought it was only fair to return the favor. I held out my hand. David stepped forward and placed the heavy black binder firmly into my palm. I dropped the binder onto the center of the table, right next to Mr. Sterling's untouched plate of roasted lamb. The heavy thud echoed sharply in the quiet room. My mother half rose from her chair. Matthew, please, not now. Have some respect. I ignored her. I flipped the binder open to the first tab. I looked directly at my father. He looked like a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. Let's talk about self-reliance, I said, reading from the crisp white page. March 12th. The warehouse insurance was canceled for non-payment. You called me at midnight, begging for $15,000 so the union wouldn't walk out. I wired you the money from my personal savings. The money I earned working 14-hour shifts at the port. A low murmur rippled through the room. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. That is a lie, my father shouted. The microphone screeched slightly. His voice was frantic, cracking under the pressure. He is disgruntled. He's a low-level clerk trying to extort his own family. 2 hours after that wire cleared, I continued, raising my voice just enough to overpower his panic. You transferred that exact amount to Julian's personal account. He used it to make the down payment on a brand new Porsche 911. I turned my head and looked at Julian. The golden boy was shrinking in his chair. Isabella dropped his hand like it was suddenly on fire. She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and disgust. You're lying, Julian yelled, his voice cracking like a teenager. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. Section 3, page 42. David spoke up for the first time. His voice was clinical, professional, devastating. Includes the bank routing numbers, the cashier's check receipt from the Atlanta dealership, and the fraudulent internal ledger entry classifying the incoming wire as owner's capital. My father stepped back from the podium. He was shaking. The polished, untouchable patriarch was disintegrating in front of my eyes. October 4th, I read the next line, showing no mercy. $6,000. Stated purpose: emergency inventory. Actual destination: a lawyer's retainer for Julian's breach of contract lawsuit. A lawsuit you kept hidden from your investors. Stop, my father whispered. It wasn't a command anymore. It was a plea. Property taxes on the house? I kept going. The numbers pouring out of me like a cleansing flood. $8,300. Payroll bridges. $22,000 for customs penalties. $184,000 over 3 years. Every single dime you used to buy your reputation, Richard, came directly out of my pocket. I closed the binder. The finality of the sound made my mother flinch. You don't have a self-reliant business, I said, looking right into my father's terrified eyes. You have a parasite, and I just cut off the host. The room was dead. Nobody coughed. Nobody reached for a water glass. The elite crowd of Savannah was trapped in the uncomfortable position of witnessing a public execution. My father opened his mouth to speak, to launch one final, desperate defense, but no words came out. He looked at his wealthy friends, his suppliers, the people whose respect he valued more than his own flesh and blood. They were all staring at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Then, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the silence. Mr. Sterling stood up. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, with a face carved from granite. He ignored my father completely. He reached across the table and pulled the black binder toward him. "Mr. Sterling, please," my father croaked, stepping down from the stage, his hands out in a pleading gesture. "Those documents are fabricated. The boy is unwell. We can step into the private lounge and discuss the term sheet." Sterling held up one single finger. It was a gesture of absolute authority. My father snapped his mouth shut. Sterling flipped through the first section of the binder. His eyes scanned the bank confirmations, the dates, the matching withdrawal records. He turned to the second section. He looked at the internal accounting ledgers David had highlighted. A heavy, agonizing minute passed. Finally, Mr. Sterling closed the binder. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed. "I have been in the maritime logistics business for 40 years. Richard," Sterling said. His voice was low, but it commanded the room completely. "I know how to read a fake ledger. I had my own team run a quiet audit on Whitmore Marine last month." My father swallowed hard. "Then you know." "I knew your front-facing books were garbage," Sterling interrupted sharply. "I knew your margins made no sense. But I also saw that the massive holes in your capital were miraculously being plugged at the 11th hour, every single month. The accounts always balanced just before default. It was brilliant, invisible accounting." Sterling turned his gaze to me. His eyes swept over my cheap suit, assessing me. "I thought you had a genius working in your basement, Richard," Sterling continued. "I was prepared to invest tonight purely to get my hands on whoever was managing your crisis logistics. I assumed it was a highly paid consultant." Sterling tapped his thick finger against the black leather cover of the binder. "Turns out," Sterling said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt, "you were just bleeding your own son dry to pay for your other son's toys. That isn't business, Richard. That is theft." My father physically swayed on his feet. He reached out to grab the edge of the table to steady himself. Sterling reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper. It was the term sheet, the contract that would have saved my father's empire. Sterling tore it in half. Then he tore it in half again. He dropped the pieces onto his untouched plate of food. "We are done here," Sterling announced to the room. "I do not invest in frauds. and I certainly do not invest in leeches. He turned to me, gave a short, respectful nod, and walked right out the main doors. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The sound of the tearing paper was the final nail in the coffin. With Mr. Sterling's exit, the illusion shattered completely. The invisible shield of wealth and respectability that my father had worn his entire life dissolved into thin air. My mother let out a sharp, ragged sob. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. She wasn't crying because she felt bad for me. She was crying because the women sitting at the adjacent tables, the women she played tennis with, the women she hosted for charity brunches, were watching her world burn. Julian was completely frozen. He looked at the torn pieces of the contract on Sterling's plate, his mind struggling to comprehend that the endless fountain of free money had just dried up permanently. My father didn't look at me. He stared blankly at the floor. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The arrogant man who had mocked me from the stage a week ago was gone. He looked small, hollowed out, and pathetic. I felt no guilt. I felt no pity. I had given them every opportunity to tell the truth. I had given them a private warning. They chose this. I looked at David. He gave me a slight nod. The job was done. I turned around and started walking back down the center aisle. "Matthew!" my mother cried out. She stumbled out of her chair, her heels catching on the carpet. She reached out, her manicured hand grabbing my forearm. "Matthew, wait! You have to fix this. Talk to Mr. Sterling. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. We are your family." I stopped. I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, I reached over and peeled her fingers off my arm. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was completely void of emotion. "I am not your accountant. I am not your safety net. And as of tonight, I am not your son." I walked out the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the humid Savannah night. The valet brought my car around. David got into the passenger seat. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Breathe, Matt," David said quietly. I rolled down the window. I took a massive, deep breath of the thick, salty air coming off the river. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't doing mental math. I wasn't calculating payroll shortages. I wasn't terrified of my phone ringing. The heavy, suffocating chain that had been wrapped around my chest snapped. A wave of pure, absolute relief washed over me so hard it made my vision blur. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the yacht club. I left them all behind in the wreckage of their own making. The collapse of the Whitmore legacy was not a slow decline. Without my hidden financial support, and with Mr. Sterling loudly pulling his investment, the house of cards fell with terrifying speed. It took exactly 2 weeks for the reality of their situation to hit the pavement. Word travels fast in Savannah's maritime industry. By Monday morning, every supplier knew Whitmore Marine Supply was insolvent. The company accounts were frozen. The union workers, realizing their payroll drafts had bounced, walked off the warehouse floor. They stood outside the gates with picket signs. My father desperately tried to secure a high-interest bridge loan from a predatory lender. But the moment they ran a credit check and audited his actual revenue, they laughed him out of the room. But the most satisfying consequence happened in broad daylight, right in the driveway of my parents' historic home. I heard about it from Luke, who suddenly found a reason to text me the details, desperately trying to switch sides now that my father had no power. Julian was inside the house, arguing with my mother, when a heavy flatbed tow truck backed into the driveway. 2 men in work boots stepped out, holding a clipboard with a repossession order from the Atlanta dealership. Julian ran out the front door, screaming at the men, demanding they stop. He threatened to call a lawyer. The repo men didn't even blink. They hooked up the chains, hoisted the gleaming slate-gray Porsche 911 onto the flatbed, and drove away. Julian stood in the driveway, watching his identity roll down the street. Isabella didn't stick around to comfort him. The moment she realized the Porsche was a fraud, the trust fund was empty, and the family name was toxic, she packed her bags. She canceled the wedding planner, sent Julian a text message ending the engagement, and immediately started dating a real estate developer from Charleston. She even hired a lawyer to ensure she didn't have to return the engagement ring, claiming it was a gift under false pretenses. My father hid in his dark oak office. He refused to answer the phone. The vendors started filing liens against the business. Then came the final blow to my mother's pride. Because my father had used their home as collateral to secure inventory lines years ago, lines of credit he couldn't pay without my transfers, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. The historic mansion, the crown jewel of my mother's social standing, the house I had bled myself dry to pay the property taxes on, was seized. There was no dignified exit. There was no downsizing for retirement spin. A massive neon-orange bank auction sign was pounded into the perfectly manicured front lawn for every single neighbor to see. They had lost the business. They had lost the cars. They had lost the house. They had lost the respect of the entire city. They had lost everything because they threw away the only person who was actually keeping them afloat. I watched it all happen from a distance, feeling completely detached. I didn't celebrate their ruin, but I didn't shed a single tear for them either. I was too busy building my own life. 6 months later, the air in Savannah felt completely different. Or maybe it was just the altitude. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse apartment, looking down at the Savannah River. Massive cargo ships drifted slowly past, blowing their deep, resonant horns. I held a cup of hot, expensive coffee in my hand. I bought this apartment with cash. The day after the Commodore dinner, I walked into the logistics firm at the port. I marched straight past Carter, the slick rival who had stolen my promotion, and walked directly into the regional manager's office. I didn't ask for my promotion back. I handed him my resignation letter. "You're making a mistake, Matthew," the manager had said, looking genuinely shocked. "Carter is struggling with the new accounts. The board is actually considering shifting some of his load back to you." "I'm not interested in carrying his load," I told him, dropping my security badge on his desk. "I'm going to take his clients." David and I launched our own firm, Cole and Whitmore Forensic Auditing. We specialized in maritime logistics, catching billing errors, and restructuring failing supply chains. The news of what happened at the Commodore dinner had spread like wildfire. Everyone in the industry knew I was the invisible architect who had kept Whitmore Marine alive for 3 years against impossible odds. They knew I was ruthless, honest, and completely unafraid of ugly numbers. Clients flooded our phone lines. Boat captains, massive freight companies, even some of my father's old suppliers came to us to clean up their books. Within 4 months, our firm was generating triple the salary I had ever made at the port. Carter ended up getting fired for incompetence when he couldn't hide behind my audits anymore. I was sleeping 8 hours a night. I was eating well. The dark circles under my eyes vanished. The constant, gnawing anxiety in my stomach was entirely gone. I had cut the dead weight and I was finally flying. But ghosts have a funny way of lingering, trying to drag you back into the dirt. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I saw him again. I walked out of the glass doors of my new office building in downtown Savannah, opening my umbrella. The street was slick with rain. Standing near the corner, shivering slightly in a wrinkled raincoat, was my father. He looked incredibly old. His hair was completely white, uncombed. His shoulders were stooped, carrying the heavy weight of a broken ego. The booming, arrogant patriarch was entirely erased. He stepped directly into my path. He didn't look me in the eye. He stared at the wet pavement. "Matthew," he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping across concrete. I stopped. I didn't lower my umbrella to shield him from the rain. I just looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the hollow feeling you get when you look at a stranger on the street. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked. He flinched at the sound of his first name. We are in a very bad place, son. The bankruptcy lawyer is taking everything. Julian is living on a friend's couch. Your mother and we are moving into a small rental apartment near the highway." He paused, swallowing hard. The pride was choking him, but desperation was stronger. "I know I made mistakes," he whispered, finally forcing himself to look up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. "I know I was wrong, but we are family. I just need a small loan, just to cover the first and last month's rent. $5,000. That's nothing to you now. I see your name on the building." I stared at him. He still didn't get it. He wasn't apologizing for the abuse, for the theft, for the public humiliation. He was just apologizing because he got caught, and because he needed cash. "You spent your goodwill, Richard," I said, my voice as cold as the rain. "You spent it on a Porsche. You spent it on a lawyer for Julian. You spent it trying to impress men who despise you. Matthew, please, your mother is sick over this." "Then she should ask Julian to get a job," I replied, stepping around him. "Do not come to my office ever again. If you do, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I walked away. I didn't turn around. I heard him call my name one more time, a weak, pathetic sound fading into the noise of the traffic. I kept walking. The rain washed his voice away completely. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a few weeks later, bringing a twisted sense of closure to the whole nightmare. David and I were running a routine background check on a new client who had ties to some local Savannah real estate. While cross-referencing public tax records, David stumbled across a familiar name. "Aunt Martha." He called me into his office, a grim smirk on his face. "You want to see something hilarious?" I leaned over his desk, looking at the glowing monitor. David brought up a series of public liens and court judgments against my aunt. "Remember how Martha was always the one calling you, telling you to do your duty, telling you to protect your mother's peace?" David asked, tapping the screen. "Yeah, the Southern Belle guilt trip." "Well," David chuckled darkly, "turns out, sweet Aunt Martha has a massive gambling problem. She was completely underwater with casino debts in Biloxi." I frowned, looking at the dates of her judgments. They lined up perfectly with the years my father started draining my accounts. "It gets better," David said, pulling up another document. "During the bankruptcy hearings for your father's business, the court auditors tracked the personal cash flow. Martha wasn't just guilt-tripping you. She was the one whispering in your father's ear. She convinced Richard that he was entitled to your salary because they raised you. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The manipulation wasn't just my father's panic. It was coordinated. And why did she care? I asked, though I was starting to guess the sick punchline. "Because," David grinned, "she needed cash. Once Richard squeezed the money out of you and funneled it to Julian, Martha would go to Julian. She would play the doting aunt, cry about a temporary emergency, and borrow cash from Julian's overflowing accounts. Accounts you funded." I stood up, staring at the screen. My aunt manipulated my father into extorting me to fund my brother so she could steal from him. A perfect, toxic circle of parasites feeding off each other, with me trapped at the bottom, shoveling coal into the furnace. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel the rage that used to burn in my chest. Instead, I started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a loud, echoing laugh that filled the office. It was the laugh of a man who realizes he has just escaped from an insane asylum. They deserved each other. They truly did. The Whitmore family wasn't an empire. It was a snake eating its own tail, and I was finally outside the cage. I walked back into my corner office. The afternoon sun was casting long, golden rays across my mahogany desk. I walked over to the bookshelf behind my chair. Sitting on the top shelf, right next to my framed accounting certifications, was a simple black frame. Inside it wasn't a diploma or an award. It was the first page of the black binder. The paper was crisp, the black ink stark against the white background. The list of numbers, the dates, the proof of their betrayal. Some people asked me why I kept it. They thought it was morbid, a monument to my trauma. But they didn't understand. I didn't keep it to stay angry. I kept it as an ironclad reminder of my own value. For 29 years, I believed that love was a transaction. I believed that I had to buy my family's affection by being the reliable workhorse, by sacrificing my college fund, my promotions, and my peace of mind. I thought that if I just gave them enough, if I fixed enough of their mistakes, they would eventually look at me the way they looked at Julian. But looking at that framed page, I realized the ultimate truth. You cannot buy respect from people who view you as an appliance. A toaster doesn't get a thank you when it works. It only gets hit when it breaks. My father didn't break me. He just woke me up. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the good stuff, the kind my father used to drink when he was pretending to be a king. I raised the glass to the framed piece of paper, to the empty Savannah skyline, and to the absolute silence of a phone that no longer rang with emergencies. I took a sip. The burn in my chest was warm and satisfying. I had lost my family, but I had finally found myself. And looking around at the life I had built from the ashes, I knew exactly who the real golden child was. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy journey to recount, but saying it out loud brings a certain kind of peace. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you've ever felt like you were carrying the weight of the world for people who wouldn't lift a finger for you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where setting a boundary felt like starting a war? Tell me about it down below. And if you are hearing my voice right now, that means you made it to the very end. You are part of the 1% Club. Please drop a W in the comments section. W for winner. That is our secret code, so I can personally recognize the amazing people who stood by me through this entire crazy ride. If my story helped you, or if you just want to hear more real-life experiences, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We have a lot more to talk about. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.